Welcome back to Reddit Drama Unpacked. Imagine building your entire life with someone you love, only to discover they sold you out for greed. But what if you didn't crumble? What if you fought back, not with rage, but with cold, calculated revenge? Today's story is one of ruthless betrayal, brutal justice, and the high cost of infidelity. Stay till the end, because this isn't just payback. This is a masterclass in revenge. Let's dive in. Daniel Morgan had built his life like a skyscraper, floor by floor, calculation by calculation, until it towered above almost everyone around him. At 41, Daniel wasn't just another Wall Street success story. He was the story. The founder and CEO of Morgan Capital Partners, a private equity firm with assets exceeding $2.5 billion under management, Daniel had earned his place among New York's financial elite. His name appeared in Forbes profiles, his face often graced the business section of the Times, and his invitation was always front and center for every exclusive gala uptown. But Daniel's real prize wasn't the money nor the power. It was his wife, Sophie. Sophie Morgan embodied the very essence of Manhattan elegance. At 37, she was a former model turned interior designer, known for her stunning emerald green eyes and cascading auburn hair that seemed to shimmer under any light. She moved through charity events and art galleries like royalty, calm, poised, adored. Together they were envied. The Morgans, New York's perfect power couple. Or so everyone thought. It started small, almost unnoticeable. Sophie always had busy weeks managing her high-end design firm, but lately, Daniel noticed her late nights had stretched longer and more frequently. She blamed demanding clients, last-minute consultations, and impossible schedules that he, being a businessman, could easily empathize with. But something felt off. There were new behaviors, minor shifts that Daniel's trained instincts couldn't ignore. Sophie had recently taken up private yoga classes, Pilates, and even hired a personal trainer, a man Daniel had never met. She started buying new designer clothes she never wore for him, spent more time curating her appearance than usual, and oddly, became far more protective of her phone. She laughed at texts she wouldn't share, her screen always tilted away when he entered the room. Daniel tried to silence his growing unease. He reminded himself how much he trusted her. 12 years of marriage wasn't easily shaken by insecurities, but as weeks passed, that unease morphed into a gnawing suspicion. One evening, returning home after closing a major deal that would net his firm $80 million, Daniel found Sophie's phone lying unlocked on the kitchen island. A rare accident. He hesitated. His moral compass screamed at him to respect her privacy, but the storm in his gut wouldn't let him walk away. The screen blinked with a new message. Brandon. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. Same suite next week. Daniel's world stopped. Brandon Pierce. The name was like venom in his mouth. CEO of Pierce Global Holdings, another power broker in Daniel's world, a man he had shared cocktails with, played golf alongside, and even partnered with on multi-million-dollar joint ventures. Daniel's fingers moved without his permission, scrolling through message after message, explicit, intimate, shameless. Brandon and Sophie had been meeting for months, booking luxury suites under false names, stealing hours behind Daniel's back while pretending their marriages were perfect facades. Every text was a dagger, every emoji a twisting blade. Daniel placed the phone back exactly as he found it, his hands shaking as rage and heartbreak warred inside him. The woman he had adored, supported, and protected had betrayed him. But Daniel Morgan was not a man easily broken. He wasn't going to confront Sophie in anger, not yet. Rage was messy, sloppy, and Daniel had never built billion-dollar empires by being sloppy. No, he would prepare, he would gather facts, he would make sure that when he moved there would be no escape for Sophie or Brandon, because this betrayal wouldn't end with screaming matches or tears. No, this would end with absolute ruin. The following morning, Daniel Morgan was no longer the man who went to bed the night before. The switch had flipped. His world wasn't shattered, it was recalibrated. He wasn't a broken husband. He was a strategist now. At 6 a.m. sharp, while Sophie still slept peacefully beside him, Daniel rose quietly from the bed and stepped into his study, a sleek, glass-walled sanctuary perched high above Manhattan, As the first rays of morning sunlight sliced through the skyline, Daniel opened his secure laptop and pulled out a small black leather notebook that rarely left the safety deposit box he kept at Hudson Trust. Inside the notebook were contacts. Not friends, not colleagues, assets. These weren't men you called for brunch at the Four Seasons. These were the men you called when your world required correction. Daniel's finger landed on one name, Nathan Cole. Nathan wasn't a private investigator in the conventional sense. He was something far more effective, a problem solver. His business wasn't listed on any website, no public address, no Google reviews. You either knew Nathan or you didn't exist in his world. Daniel texted a single word. Meet. Within minutes, his phone vibrated. Nathan. Same location. 30 minutes. By 6:45 a.m., Daniel sat inside the back booth of the Mercer Club, a private breakfast-only dining room inside an unmarked brownstone in Soho. It was a sanctuary for men like Daniel, powerful men who solved ugly problems while the rest of the world was still asleep. Nathan entered like a shadow, sliding into the booth opposite him. Tall, lean and precise, Nathan wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, no tie, short-cropped hair, and ice-cold blue eyes that never missed a detail. "You don't usually call, Daniel," Nathan said flatly. "Must be serious." Daniel wasted no time. He slid Sophie's unlocked phone across the table. The last conversation with Brandon still open on the screen. Nathan scrolled briefly, his eyes narrowing. Pierce. Daniel nodded. Nathan closed the phone calmly and placed it face down on the table. "How deep do you want me to go?" "All the way," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I want everything. Where they meet, how long, how often, hotel bookings, financial trails, anything that can be used against them." Nathan studied him for a moment. "You don't just want proof. You want leverage." Daniel's voice was calm but razor sharp. "Leverage isn't enough. I want to break them." Nathan gave the faintest of nods. "Understood." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small recording device, and placed it between them. "For the record," Nathan said, turning it on, "you're aware that what you're asking for may involve surveillance, data collection, financial digging, and potential exposure of private conduct. Do you give full authorization?" Daniel leaned in slightly. "Nathan, I'm not here for legality. I'm here for finality." Nathan smiled faintly. "Then we begin." The days that followed tested Daniel's patience in ways his financial battles never had. Each morning, Daniel rose before Sophie. He cooked her breakfast. He kissed her cheek before she left for work, playing the perfect husband. She was completely unaware that every movement, every message, every transaction was now being tracked with surgical precision. At night, they shared dinners like nothing had changed. She would laugh, sip her wine and talk about meaningless things while Daniel nodded, storing every fabricated word like ammunition. But inside, Daniel was building a silent war machine. By the end of week 1, Nathan delivered the first dossier. "Initial findings," Nathan said, sliding a thick manila folder across Daniel's desk. Daniel opened it slowly. There it was. Bank receipts from the Plaza Royale Hotel, the Lexington Grand, and the Carlton Reserve, all booked under pseudonyms. Restaurant tabs from high-end establishments Daniel had never visited. A pattern of overlapping business trips that aligned perfectly with Brandon S. speaking engagements across the country. Dozens of text exchanges and encrypted app screenshots. High-resolution photos of Sophie and Brandon entering and exiting various luxury hotels at odd hours. Daniel's chest tightened as he flipped to the photos. Sophie, smiling, her arm around Brandon's waist. Brandon pressing his lips against her neck inside a private cabana suite. The woman he had loved for over a decade, a woman he no longer recognized. And yet, despite the white-hot anger, Daniel kept his face perfectly composed. "Continue," he said. Nathan nodded and leaned forward. "There's more." What Nathan revealed next shifted everything. "Brandon's not just sleeping with your wife. He's made a career out of affairs like this." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Nathan pulled a second file. 3 years ago, Brandon had an affair with the wife of a venture capitalist he was brokering a deal with. That man lost millions. Last year, another affair with a hedge fund partner's wife. Same story. Brandon manipulates powerful women in his orbit, creates chaos in their marriages, and when their husbands self-destruct or collapse financially, he acquires distressed assets at bargain prices. Daniel absorbed the words like a general reviewing battle intel. He weaponizes his affairs. Exactly. Nathan's eyes hardened. And from what I can tell, Sophie isn't just a fling. She was likely targeted because of you. The air between them turned electric. Daniel leaned back, cold fury pumping through his veins. This is bigger than betrayal, Nathan. This is warfare. Nathan smiled slightly. That's why you hired me. That night, as Daniel sat across from Sophie during dinner, he watched her closely. She wore a new emerald necklace, a gift, no doubt, from Brandon. She was radiant, glowing, sipping her wine, as if the world were perfectly intact. You're quiet tonight, Sophie said softly, smiling. Daniel smiled back, his voice warm. Just thinking about how lucky I am. Sophie reached for his hand across the table. I feel lucky too. Her lies tasted like poison, but Daniel played his part flawlessly. Inside, however, the clock was ticking, because Daniel wasn't planning revenge anymore. He was planning execution. Daniel Morgan never believed in accidents. Every move, every piece, every play was intentional. That's how he built his empire. And now, it was how he would dismantle Sophie and Brandon Pierce. By week 2, Nathan's investigation had turned up even more disturbing information. This man doesn't simply seduce for pleasure, Nathan said, sliding yet another folder across Daniel's desk. Brandon Pierce is a predator by trade. Daniel flipped open the folder. His stomach twisted as he read through Pierce's long trail of calculated seductions, most of which were tied to high-profile business deals. 3 wives, 3 destroyed marriages, 3 husbands who lost their companies or suffered catastrophic financial losses. And guess who picked up the assets at bottom dollar every time? Nathan said coldly. Brandon Pierce, or one of his shell companies. Daniel's fury simmered beneath his skin. He's a parasite. And your wife was his latest host. Daniel exhaled slowly, holding his rage back behind a cold exterior. We're not just dealing with an affair. We're dealing with a full-scale financial predator. Nathan leaned forward. We need leverage, and I know exactly where to get it. That's when the real plan took shape. If Brandon was the disease, Daniel needed an equally dangerous ally, someone who had as much to lose, and more importantly, as much rage to unleash. Her name was Isabella Pierce, Brandon's wife. Daniel had met her only once briefly at a charity gala 2 years ago. Elegant, composed. But in her eyes, Daniel remembered seeing something cold beneath the surface. Strength. Daniel knew reaching out to Isabella was a gamble, but she was the one person who had as much reason to destroy Brandon as he did. That evening, Daniel made the call. He used a private number, carefully encrypted. The phone rang twice. Isabella's voice answered, controlled and calm. This is Isabella. Daniel wasted no time. Mrs. Pierce, my name is Daniel Morgan. I believe your husband and my wife have been involved. A moment of silence. I see, she said coolly. And why are you calling me? Because unlike most people, I don't believe in simply confronting cheaters with emotions. I believe in something far more effective, consequences, and I suspect you may share that belief. He waited. He heard her exhale slowly. Where do you want to meet? They met 2 hours later at the Dominion, a private rooftop club overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Only power players came here. It was neutral ground. Isabella walked in wearing a sharp, tailored black suit, her long auburn hair tied back, minimal jewelry, but radiating quiet power. She took a seat across from Daniel, her expression unreadable. You said you had proof, she asked flatly. Daniel slid the thick folder across the table. All of it, photos, text records, hotel logs, financial transactions. Isabella opened the folder with steady hands and began reviewing the contents. She didn't flinch, not once. She studied each page like a surgeon studying an X-ray before surgery. Daniel respected her control. After several minutes, she closed the file gently and met his gaze. "How long?" she asked. 8 months minimum, Daniel replied. She exhaled and reached for her wine glass. "I suspected something, but I didn't realize how deep this went. They're reckless, arrogant. They think we're fools." A thin, bitter smile crossed Isabella's lips. "He's made a career out of this." Daniel nodded. "That's why I contacted you. You and I both have something in common. We've been publicly humiliated by people who underestimated us, and we both have something to gain by ending them, permanently." Isabella studied him carefully for a long moment, then spoke with icy calm. "I want him destroyed, Mr. Morgan. Not embarrassed, not simply exposed. I want Brandon to lose everything he's built, everything he values. I want him to be broken." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then we're in full agreement." For the next 2 hours they strategized. This wasn't petty revenge. It was corporate warfare. Brandon had leveraged his affairs to destroy businesses and steal assets. Daniel and Isabella would turn the same tactics against him. Nathan would continue gathering evidence. Bank transfers, secret accounts, business shell companies. Every offshore deal Brandon thought was safe would be uncovered. Daniel would target Brandon's investors. Isabella would pull strings inside the circles Brandon had manipulated for years. The SEC would receive anonymous tips, the IRS would be given flagged transactions, and Brandon's carefully woven financial empire would begin to crumble. But that was only phase 1. Phase 2 was personal, the public exposure. A gala was approaching in 3 weeks. A charity fundraiser Brandon himself was co-hosting, filled with press, politicians, business leaders, and social elites. That would be the stage. That would be the execution. Daniel leaned forward as they finalized the plan. "When this is over, he won't have a business, a marriage, or a reputation." Isabella smiled, raising her glass. "To total annihilation." Daniel clinked his glass against hers, the quiet click sealing their dark pact. For the next 3 weeks, Daniel and Isabella worked like assassins in the shadows. Every move was calculated, every piece meticulously placed. Nathan delivered daily reports to Daniel, each one tightening the noose around Brandon's neck. Offshore accounts were uncovered. Business shell companies were exposed. Undisclosed stock manipulations appeared, violations that would draw the attention of federal regulators once leaked. "This isn't just an affair anymore," Nathan remarked one afternoon, spreading the files across Daniel's desk. "We're looking at securities fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. He could do serious time." Daniel's lips tightened. "Good. I want him bankrupt before he ever sees a courtroom." Meanwhile, Isabella was dismantling Brandon's political shields from the inside. She had contacts, high-powered friends who owed her favors. She called them in, one by one. "Brandon Pierce will soon be radioactive," she told Daniel during one of their nightly strategy sessions. "No one will touch him when this explodes." Daniel leaned back in his chair, feeling the storm building. "And Sophie?" Isabella's face hardened. "She's finished too. The moment your evidence goes public, she'll be blacklisted from every charity board, every interior design firm, every high society circle she's built her image around." Daniel smirked. "Then let's give them the show they deserve." The gala arrived like the final act of a Greek tragedy. It was hosted at the Astoria Grand, a glittering palace of chandeliers, marble staircases, and endless crystal glasses. The city's elite gathered under the illusion of philanthropy, oblivious to the bomb about to detonate. Daniel arrived in a custom-tailored black tuxedo, his cufflinks glinting under the warm lights. He entered with calculated poise, his expression calm, hiding the storm raging beneath. Isabella entered moments later, stunning in an emerald green gown that shimmered like liquid under the lights. Their partnership wasn't romantic, it was surgical. Two generals walking onto the battlefield. The whispers started immediately. People noticed their entrance together. Those who knew of Brandon's reputation exchanged glances, sensing that something dangerous was unfolding. At the far end of the room, Daniel spotted them. Brandon Pierce, dressed as always like a man who believed he was untouchable, stood laughing with a small circle of investors. Beside him, Sophie played her part as the beautiful, dutiful wife, her hand delicately resting on Brandon's forearm. For a brief moment, Daniel's stomach twisted, not out of heartbreak anymore, but from pure contempt. The woman who once shared his bed was nothing but a liar standing next to a predator. "They have no idea," Isabella whispered beside him. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "But they will." The program began with the usual speeches, charitable goals, thank yous to donors, polite applause. But as the keynote address concluded, the lights suddenly dimmed. Whispers rippled across the crowd. Daniel glanced at Isabella, who gave him a small nod. Nathan, stationed in the tech booth, had triggered the plan. The massive LED screen behind the stage flickered to life. At first, guests thought it was a promotional video, but within seconds the footage shifted. The screen cut to another clip, Brandon and Sophie stepping out of a luxury suite together days later, holding hands, kissing in the hallway. Then the text messages appeared, dozens of them. Sophie: "I miss you already. Last night was everything." Brandon: "I can't wait for our next escape. He has no idea." Sophie: "I feel so alive with you. He bores me to death." Murmurs turned into audible gasps, followed by shocked whispers and a few stifled laughs. Sophie's face went sheet white. Her hand trembled around her champagne glass. Brandon's confident smile evaporated. His eyes darted wildly around the room, his breath sharp and uneven. The final blow came when financial records flashed onto the screen. Offshore transactions, illegal transfers, fraudulent acquisitions, document after document exposing Brandon's financial crimes. At the bottom of each file, in bold red letters, "Pending submission to federal authorities." Silence strangled the room. Hundreds of eyes bored into Brandon and Sophie like vultures circling a dying carcass. Daniel stepped forward into the stunned quiet, his voice ringing out cold and clear. "I believe that concludes tonight's entertainment." No one laughed. They only stared. Sophie stumbled toward him, her face streaked with silent tears. "Daniel, please, I can explain." But Daniel raised a hand, cutting her off with surgical calm. "No, Sophie, you've already said enough." He turned his back on her, walking toward the exit as cameras continued rolling, capturing every detail for tomorrow's headlines. Isabella fell in step beside him. Behind them, Brandon stood frozen, his empire crumbling in real time. His investors already pulling away, his board members texting lawyers under the tables. Federal agents would be knocking on his door within 24 hours. As Daniel exited into the cool Manhattan night, he exhaled deeply. Phase 1 was complete, but Phase 2, the real destruction, was just beginning. The aftermath was swift, ruthless, surgical. By sunrise, the story had already exploded across every major news outlet in the country. Brandon Pierce exposed. Secret affair. Massive financial fraud uncovered at Astoria Gala. Images of the scandal flashed across morning talk shows. Clips of the footage from the gala, leaked intentionally by Nathan's team, were now viral sensations on social media. The hotel surveillance, the text messages, the financial documents, all of it dissected by analysts, bloggers, and financial reporters. Brandon Pierce, once hailed as Manhattan's golden boy, had become national news for all the wrong reasons. The stock of Pierce Global plummeted within hours. His board of directors, desperate to save what little remained of the sinking ship, convened an emergency meeting. Brandon was officially removed as CEO by noon. His lavish Upper East Side penthouse was flooded by reporters, photographers camped outside like vultures circling a corpse. Brandon locked himself inside, refusing to answer calls from panicked lawyers, abandoned investors, and government officials. Federal agents moved fast. By the end of the week, charges were filed: securities fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, wire fraud. Bail was set at an obscene amount, but Brandon's accounts had already been frozen. His offshore assets were seized, private planes grounded. His world shrank into a tiny apartment paid for by the last crumbs of what used to be an empire. The man who once strutted through Manhattan as a king now stood as a public disgrace. Sophie's fall was equally brutal. Her name vanished from every charity roster within 48 hours. Sponsors pulled their funding. Invitations evaporated overnight. Luxury boutiques cancelled her private accounts. Creditors called. Friends ghosted her. She tried to salvage what she could, contacting old friends, trying to generate sympathy. But the social circles she once dominated treated her like a virus they didn't want to catch. The lavish apartment she shared with Daniel was sold within days. The proceeds, per the ironclad prenuptial agreement Daniel had prepared years ago, went entirely to him. Sophie was left with nothing. A one-bedroom rental in a part of Manhattan she once called the ghetto was now her entire world. 1 week after the gala, Daniel sat across from his divorce attorney reviewing the final paperwork. "It's done," his lawyer confirmed, sliding the papers across the table. "She officially signed away any remaining claim to your assets. The court accepted full fault based on the evidence." Daniel nodded, not smiling, not celebrating, simply breathing for the first time in months. "Make sure the transfer to the charity goes through as well," Daniel instructed. "Of course," his lawyer said. "Every penny she would have gotten now funds cancer research, just like you wanted." Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the final weight lift off his chest. It was over. That night, Daniel walked through his new apartment overlooking the skyline. The silence felt different now, no longer heavy with betrayal but light, freeing. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stepped onto the balcony. Isabella joined him moments later, her heels clicking softly against the marble. "It's done," she whispered, standing beside him. Daniel nodded. "Completely." They stood together, watching Manhattan glitter beneath them. "You're free, Daniel." "No," Daniel corrected softly, his eyes distant. "I'm cleansed." But miles away in a crumbling apartment filled with silence and shame, Sophie sat alone. Her phone buzzed constantly, calls from debt collectors, reporters, and lawyers. She had tried texting Daniel dozens of times. "Please, just one conversation. I made a mistake. Don't do this to me." But Daniel never responded. The world she thought was invincible had abandoned her overnight. She had traded a kingdom for an affair, and now sat in exile, alone, broke, forgotten. The price of betrayal had been exacted in full. 2 months had passed. For most people, the scandal had already faded from daily headlines. New stories, new disasters had replaced the old. But for Brandon and Sophie, the nightmare was just beginning. Brandon's criminal trial loomed. Federal prosecutors were relentless, and the mountain of evidence Nathan's team had exposed had only grown larger since the gala. Pierce Global was liquidated piece by piece. Every asset he once controlled had either been seized, auctioned off, or handed over to authorities. His army of lawyers couldn't stop the bleeding. They could only delay the inevitable. One morning, Brandon sat in a stark conference room at the Department of Justice building downtown. His face was gaunt, his suit ill-fitting, borrowed from a public defender. Across the table sat Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Larson, the woman tasked with finishing his destruction. "You have 2 options, Mr. Pierce," Larson said coldly, flipping through a thick folder of damning documents. "We can proceed to trial where you'll likely be sentenced to 20 years, or you can cooperate." Brandon swallowed hard. His confidence had been broken. The arrogance that once radiated from him was now nothing more than a hollow shell. "Cooperate how?" he asked hoarsely. "You have information about your business partners, your shell companies, the offshore networks. Give us that and we'll recommend a reduced sentence. But make no mistake, either way, your freedom is gone." Brandon leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The circle was closing in on him, and the one man who had triggered all of this, Daniel Cole, stood untouched, higher than ever, untouchable. He had nothing left, no allies, no escape routes. "I'll talk," Brandon whispered. Sophie, meanwhile, was drowning. She worked 2 part-time jobs just to cover rent and groceries. The designer clothes were long sold, the luxury cars gone. Her social media, once filled with staged glamour, was now completely silent. One evening, after finishing a shift as a hostess at a mid-tier restaurant, Sophie sat on a park bench overlooking the East River. The cold wind bit at her face as she scrolled through old photos on her phone. The life she had thrown away looked so distant now, like a cruel fantasy that belonged to someone else. She had tried for weeks to contact Daniel, every message ignored, every call unanswered. "Daniel, please. Just 5 minutes. I know I failed you. Please don't erase me completely." But he had erased her. Completely. Her shame wasn't only financial, it was total social exile. People she once called friends now crossed the street to avoid even making eye contact. She pulled her coat tighter, her eyes burning. For the first time, Sophie admitted to herself a truth she had fought to avoid. She had destroyed herself. No one else. Daniel, meanwhile, continued to thrive. Astoria Capital flourished after Brandon's downfall, securing high-profile deals that once belonged to Pierce Global. His reputation soared. Yet it wasn't just business. With every victory, Daniel's confidence grew sharper, his mind even more focused. The betrayal had hardened him, but it hadn't broken him. One evening, standing in front of his office window, Isabella approached him with a thin smile. "The DOJ just called," she said softly. "Brandon flipped. He's turning over everything." Daniel nodded, unsurprised. "Good," he replied calmly. "Let him destroy the rest of the empire himself." He sipped his whiskey, gazing at the New York skyline. "This city rewards the strong, Isabella, those who adapt, those who aren't afraid to burn everything that no longer serves them." Isabella studied him for a moment, then whispered, "And you, Daniel, are you done burning?" He didn't answer, because he wasn't. The final nail wasn't legal. It was personal. A charity gala was scheduled at the Metropolitan Museum, a massive annual event where New York ace elite gathered to flaunt their power and wealth. Daniel and Isabella made their entrance like royalty. The cameras flashed. Journalists whispered. Brandon, of course, wasn't invited. He was now nothing more than a headline. But Sophie, she was there, not as a guest, as hired staff. Dressed in a black catering uniform, she weaved through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne, avoiding eye contact, praying not to be recognized. But Daniel saw her. Of course he did. Their eyes locked across the room. Her face flushed instantly, her hand trembling as she balanced the tray. Daniel didn't approach. He didn't need to. The message was clear. You chose this, and now you live in it. Brandon Pierce was officially a broken man. When his court date arrived, the federal courthouse was buzzing with reporters and onlookers eager to see the fall of a former titan. Brandon shuffled in, shackled, a shadow of the powerful figure he once was. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and the fire that once burned in his eyes was gone, replaced by something hollow, defeated. The proceedings were swift. The government had built an airtight case, and Brandon S.'s decision to cooperate did little to save him from the storm he had helped create. When the judge finally pronounced the sentence, 18 years in federal prison, Brandon didn't flinch. He just lowered his head, accepting it like a man who knew he deserved every second of it. Outside the courthouse, Daniel and Isabella watched from a distance hidden among the crowds. 18 years, Isabella murmured, a trace of satisfaction in her voice. That's mercy compared to what he did to others. Daniel nodded, but there was no gloating, no smile, only a cold finality. He made his choices, now he lives with them. As Brandon was led away, photographers snapped pictures, their flashes harsh and unforgiving. Somewhere in the crowd, a reporter shouted, "Brandon, any last words?" Brandon paused for a fraction of a second. Then, without looking up, he muttered, "Tell Daniel Cole he won." But Daniel didn't need to hear it. He already knew. Later that night, the city was alive, oblivious to the personal wars fought within it. Daniel stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the skyline a sea of glittering lights below him. He wasn't alone. Isabella joined him, handing over a glass of bourbon. "To closure," she said, raising her glass. Daniel clinked his against hers, but his smile was faint. The war was over, but wars leave scars. "Closure is overrated," he muttered, sipping the bourbon. Isabella studied him carefully. "You don't look satisfied." Daniel shrugged. "I didn't do this to feel good. I did it because it was necessary." She leaned against the railing beside him, quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "And Sophie? Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't want to think about her. He didn't want to remember the woman who had betrayed him with a smile, who had sold out a decade of love for the illusion of something better. "She's where she belongs," Daniel said coldly. Isabella nodded, but something in her expression softened. "You can let go now, Daniel, it's done." But could he? He wasn't sure. Some betrayals run too deep to ever fully heal. Elsewhere in the city, Sophie sat alone in her one-bedroom apartment. She hadn't unpacked the boxes stacked against the walls. She couldn't bring herself to. The space was cold, impersonal, a far cry from the penthouses and designer homes she used to know. She had applied for dozens of jobs, but found only silence in return. Once you were cast out from the elite, it was nearly impossible to claw your way back. She picked up her phone, staring at Daniel's name in her contacts. One last time, she thought. With shaking hands, she typed, "I'm sorry. Truly. I lost everything and I know I deserve it. But I never stopped loving you." She stared at the message, thumb hovering over the send button. But before she could hit it, she paused. What good would it do? Daniel didn't owe her closure. He didn't owe her anything. With a trembling breath, Sophie deleted the message. For the first time, she accepted that she was alone. Daniel watched the city for a long time, his thoughts heavy. Finally, he turned to Isabella. "Come on, let's get out of here." She smiled softly, linking her arm through his. "Where to?" Daniel stared out at the lights one last time. "Somewhere no one knows our names." And together, they disappeared into the night, leaving the ghosts of the past behind. For good.